Hey everyone, how's it going? Matthew Bailey Media here, and welcome back once again to another rankings video. And as you just saw with my top 10 worst movies of 2023, we're in the new year now, and this is now time for me to do my top 15 best movies of 2023. That's right, I managed to get another top 15 list instead of just 10 movies. Now, before we get started with the top 15, I want to give a shout out to 3 honorable mentions, 2 of which I actually had the pleasure of watching over the last 2 months recently. And those 3 honorable mentions are Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken, Trolls 3 Band Together, and lastly, Migration. Yep, I just saw Migration recently. That was the last movie of 2023 that I saw. And I gotta say, that movie was pretty interesting, but it didn't make the cuts. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's get into my top 15 best movies of 2023. So, for number 15, this movie, honestly, this is one of those movies that I wasn't originally planning on seeing this year. But then I thought, you know what, I'll give this movie a try, and it turns out it was a good choice for me to give it a shot, and that is Gran Turismo. Now, this is a movie that's not only based off of a video game, but it's also based off of a true story apparently as well, where the video game Gran Turismo is being played by this young kid, I forgot his name, but he basically just ends up getting involved in a competition where, because he's played so many video games, he actually decides to practice racing an actual car from Gran Turismo, and he ends up becoming the American spot for this position, and he goes through a lot of challenges in this movie. It's something that I honestly did not think I was gonna like, but it turns out it was a pretty deep, crazy true story that I honestly was really here for. So I gotta say, Gran Turismo was one of my favorite movies of the year, which is why it ended up just barely making the top 15. So for number 15, I gotta go with Gran Turismo. So for number 14, this is gonna be quite a surprise to you guys, but for number 14, I gotta go with a movie that I did not think I was gonna enjoy this year, and that is Barbie. Yep, I am not kidding. Barbie is at my number 14. Now, this movie, I gotta say, when I first saw the teaser trailer for this film, I was like all cringe in the theater when I first saw it. I forgot which movie I was watching when I first got introduced to the trailer for Barbie. But I gotta say, actually, no, I think I remember. It was for Avatar: The Way of Water, where I went to see that movie and I saw a teaser trailer for Barbie, and I'm like, what the heck am I watching? But then when I actually saw the movie, I gotta admit, it was much better than I thought it was gonna be. And Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling as Ken and Barbie, respectively, actually do really well in the roles. And the type of messaging they were introducing in this film was insane. And I honestly did not think I was gonna like this movie, but again, the messaging, the way the characters were acting, and even some of the cameos that I wasn't expecting. Heck, I think John Cena even made a cameo as one of the Kens, and I'm like, what the heck? But I gotta say, Barbie is again a movie that I did not expect to like, but it ended up being one of the greatest films to end up in my top 15, even if it's at number 14. So anyways, for number 14, I gotta go with, shockingly, Barbie. So, for my number 13 slot, I gotta go with a movie that, again, I recently saw in the last 2 months that I thought I was gonna hate it, mainly because of a certain star in the movie, but this is one of the only movies that she has been in that actually ended up doing really well, in my opinion, especially because it really does tell the origin, not of her character, but of another main character in this film, and that is The Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Yep, this is my number 13, and in case you're wondering, the star I'm referring to that has not been doing so well recently is Rachel Zegler. She plays Lucy Greybeard in this film, but it's a prequel to the original four Hunger Games movies, where it also has one of our main characters as Coriolanus Snow, aka President Snow, who we know him as in the future movies, and this actually tells his origin story. It does not tell Lucy Gray's story, so she's not really the main character of the movie, and she doesn't really impact her influence. She doesn't influence the movie too much to impact it with her stupid ideology bullcrap that she's been trying to push recently, especially when it comes to the Snow White film that she's going to be in. But with this movie, it tells Snow White, Coriolanus Snow's origin story on how he became the tyrannical president that we know him as in the original Hunger Games. And we even get some references to the future films, like we get Katniss's name referenced. We even get other characters that were. I think there were even characters that were descendants or ancestors to other characters from the films. Like I think the name Heavensby was referenced. We got the original host of the Hunger Games with Lucky Flickerman, who is the ancestor to Caesar Flickerman, played by Stanley Tucci, great guy by the way. But this movie, I gotta say, was a really great origin story for Coriolanus Snow, and now we sort of get a much better understanding as to why he was the way he was in the Hunger Games franchise. So for number 13, I gotta go with The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So for number 12, this is, again, a movie that honestly, the last movie did not do so well in my mind, but then this movie, I gotta say, was much better than the last film in this franchise, and that is, of course, Fast X, the 10th installment of the Fast and the Furious franchise. Now, like I said, Fast 9 that came out a few years ago was not as good as I wanted it to be. I think it still ended up on my best films of the year list though, but this movie I do kind of like more than the Fast 9. And I gotta say, this movie really seems to have you wanting more of the story, because it was pretty much left on a cliffhanger. And speaking of which, there's even one actor that shows up in a cameo in a mid-credits scene that people thought he wasn't going to come back, especially because he wasn't in the last movie, being F9, and that was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as Luke Hobbs. He makes a surprise cameo appearance in a mid-credits scene that makes it seem like he's going to come back in the next installment, and there's even rumors that he's going to do a Hobbs and Shaw sort of spin-off as well, but in this case it's Hobbs and what's the name? I forgot the name of Jason Momoa's character in the film, or his last name. But basically his last name and Hobbs in the title of the film. And I gotta say, I'm really looking forward to not just Fast 11 to see what the future is for this franchise, but also whatever that spin-off sequel is gonna be. So for number 12, I gotta go with Fast X. So for number 11, this may surprise you guys, but this is the only, well, actually, no, scratch that. This is the only one of two superhero movies that are in this list that I really enjoyed. But for the first movie that's in this list that I really enjoyed at number 11 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Yep, that's right, the third installment to the Guardians of the Galaxy universe / films, and I gotta say, this movie was insane. It kind of sucks though, because if y'all know the history of this film, James Gunn, who directed all three movies, before this movie was even filmed and made, he was supposed to film it, and it was supposed to come out before Thor: Love and Thunder, but because back in 2018, I think it was, he got wrongfully fired for some stupid tweets he did, but then they ended up bringing him back because they really wanted him to complete the trilogy, and so, but during that time he made The Suicide Squad for the DCEU, which, if y'all saw my my tier list for the DCEU films, The Suicide Squad is actually like my favorite film out of the entire DCEU because of that. And now that he's going to be in charge of the new DC universe, I'm really looking forward to what he has to say and do for that series. But with this being his last Guardians of the Galaxy film, hopefully, I mean, they're still going to use some of his characters, obviously, because Rocket is now the new leader of the Guardians. So I cannot wait to see how that pans out. And I gotta say, Peter Quill finally going back to Earth, and, well, technically he already went back to Earth during the events of Avengers Endgame. I think it was Avengers Endgame. And he didn't end up seeing his grandfather, but he goes back and visits his grandfather, and he actually goes to live with him, which I thought was crazy. So I'm curious to see how the future holds for characters like Peter Quill, Rocket, Groot, and anybody who's going to return. So for number 11, I gotta go with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So for number 10, now we're in the top 10. This is, again, a movie that I actually saw with my friend Matthew Davis Media and my cousin Tyler Bailey. That when we all saw this movie together, we did not think we were going to enjoy it as much as we did. But it turns out it was like one of the best sort of... it's supposed to be considered a horror film, but when we saw it, we thought it was really great. And that is Megan. Yep, that's right. Megan, the very first film that I ever saw during the year of 2023, was with my friend Matthew Davis Media and my cousin. And when we saw it, we ended up really enjoying it. I honestly did not expect that. And again, it was a horror film, and normally I'm not too big on horror films, especially when seeing them in the theater. But this is only one of 2 horror films that I saw in theaters, technically, physically. And now we're about to get to the next horror movie I saw on this list as well. But with Megan, I gotta say, this movie not only did well to end up in my top 10 out of the 15, but it mainly became a success due to one specific scene that we probably all know and love from that film, and that's when Megan starts doing a hallway dance that ended up becoming a huge viral sensation on TikTok and stuff like that. And I gotta say, that was one of the craziest moments of the entire film. And I did see the rated R version of the film, which really, there was only 2 scenes that were changed in the film, where in one scene you get actual blood shown on screen in the elevator right after that elevator scene, and then we also get some dialogue change right after that when she's confronting Gemma in her living room. So aside from those 2 scenes, I can see why they just decided to flat out make it PG-13. So for number 10, I gotta go with Megan. So for number 9, now we're on the second horror movie that I saw this year, but I did really enjoy this movie, and that is, of course, Scream 6. Yep, this is the 6th installment of the Scream franchise, and it's like Jasmine Savoy Brown's character said in this movie, we're in a franchise now, and I thought that was pretty crazy. But this movie, I gotta say, was really nice. It is the only one to not include Sidney Prescott, and if you all know the reason why she wasn't in this movie is because of a pay dispute. Now, even though I really enjoyed this movie, I'm honestly not too sure about what the future holds for this film series, especially because they were gonna make the 7th movie, and we were gonna see Sidney Prescott back in it again, possibly, and along with Jenna Ortega, Melissa Barrera, and all that. And there was some other director named Christopher Langdon. I haven't seen any of the films he's directed before, but my friend Matthew Davis Media has. But I think we were both honestly really looking forward to this film, to the 7th installment. But unfortunately, they recently made an announcement that a few weeks ago that they fired Melissa Barrera because of some tweets she posted on her social media that apparently the people behind the company who owns the rights to Scream, which is Spyglass, decided they don't want to be attached to that kind of talk, and so they fired her. But then they tried to bring her back after all the backlash, but they still tried to do what they did during the strikes, and constantly keep telling her, do not say this, do not say you support this, and that. And she just is like, go for yourselves. And yeah, she is not very happy with the people behind Spyglass. So I am really hoping that Scream 7 still happens. I really want to see Sidney Prescott and some of the other past characters come back. Hopefully they sell the movie rights for Scream to somebody else, because clearly Spyglass is ruining the franchise. So, but I still really enjoyed how Scream 6 panned out. So for number 9, I gotta go with Scream 6. So for my number 8 movie, this is another recent movie I saw in the theaters, and I gotta say, I honestly did not think I was gonna enjoy this movie, but and plus the marketing for this movie didn't even make it seem like it was gonna be like this, but it ended up being like it, and I honestly really enjoyed it, and that was Wonka. Yep. This is the prequel, so to speak, to the character of Willy Wonka, who owns the largest chocolate factory in the world, and he tries to, and as we know him from the Gene Wilder, I think was the name of the guy who played him in the 1970s version, and we had Johnny Depp playing him in the 2005 version, but with this weekend, but this movie specifically with Wonka, with Timothée Chalamet playing the character, he's sort of supposed to be a prequel origin story to Gene Wilder's character of Willy Wonka from the 70s film. And we get to see the original song from that movie get brought back, where he says, "Come with me and you'll be," basically that song. And I gotta say, this movie I did not expect this movie to be a flat-out musical. I mean, I know we had songs both in the 2005 Johnny Depp version and the 1970s version, which were basically the Oompa Loompa songs and that song, and the song that was sang by Gene Wilder in the 70s movie, but they had a whole bunch of new songs introduced in this movie, and I gotta say, I was pretty surprised by that. The only downside about this movie, in my opinion, was we really only got one Oompa Loompa that was played by Hugh Grant, and we didn't actually see him convince the other Oompa Loompas to come and work for him at the factory. It was just the one Oompa Loompa. But I will say, I really am hopefully looking forward to if they decide to continue with it, to see if they will lead into what happened during the events of the Gene Wilder movie. But for now, I gotta go with my number 8 being Wonka. So, for my number 7 movie, this is a movie from a franchise that honestly, I actually had to go and watch all 3 of the other installments before I saw this movie in theaters. And I gotta say, this is actually the best movie out of this franchise. And that is John Wick Chapter 4. Yep, John Wick Chapter 4. This is supposed to be the last installment to feature John Wick, where he, especially because, as we all know, slight spoiler for the movie, he does get killed off and sort of die at the end of this film. But this had way better action sequences, much better storytelling with the way things were running throughout all 3 other films. And I gotta say, Keanu Reeves as John Wick really got me when it comes to his stunt coordination, all the stunts he actually does in the movie, all the guns he's been using throughout the franchise. I mean, I gotta say, this movie was actually the best one out of the entire 4 films. Now, there's supposed to be a movie that is releasing, I think, either this year or next year, called Ballerina, which is supposed to be a spin-off movie that takes place in between the 3rd and the 4th movies, I think. So I'm not sure how that's going to work, but I'm curious to see whether or not that movie's going to be well. But for number 7, I gotta go with John Wick Chapter 4. So for my number 6 movie, this is this is one of those movies that I wasn't originally planning on seeing this year, but then I thought, you know what, my mom was wanting to see this movie, and because she heard how well it was being received, and it really told an interesting story. And I did catch the end credits to the movie a few times when I was at work at the theater, and I was doing some ushering duties, and I was pretty much waiting for people to come out, and I caught it a few times, and I thought, you know what? If my mom wants to see it, I'll use my employee pass to actually help her go see the movie for free. So that's what I did. We both saw it, and I gotta say, this movie was not what I was expecting. This movie really told a true story, actually, about censoring this part. I'm not sure if I'm gonna actually fully censor it in the video, but this whole movie was about human trafficking, especially for young children, that were pretty much being sold off to like foreign areas, and these people were basically treating these kids inappropriately bad, I guess is my best way of doing this without censoring it. And this one guy goes out of his way to go and save these kids. And I gotta say, this movie was amazing. I cannot believe I was about to skip out on this film, because this movie really tells you how bad things are in the world. And if anybody had the nerve to act like the bad guys in the film in the near future, better watch out, because it seems like things will be much worse for these types of bad guys if they continue down that path. But for number 6, I gotta go with Sound of Freedom. Okay, now we're into my top 5, and with number 5, this is a movie that honestly, I originally had this at number 2, but after a little bit of thinking, I decided to bring it back a little bit. But I still had it been in my top 15, and it's at number 5, and that is the live action The Little Mermaid. Now, even though this is the first Disney live action movie, well, actually I take that back. They did do this with the Cruella film back in 2021, where they race swapped a character, but that was not the main character. So this is the first time they actually race swapped the main character with Ariel, and they also added a few different new elements in the film, like making Ursula the sister of King Triton, which gives us a better understanding as to why she hates Triton and wanted the crown, as well as his Triton for herself. But this movie did give us a little bit more of a backstory with not just Ariel's family, but even Prince Eric gets a little bit more in-depth in his backstory, where we finally get to see a parent to him, even though they were also kind of race swapped in a way. But we never saw his parents in the original film, and this was a way of fully going more in depth to his character. We even get a new song for him as well, just like what they did with Jasmine in the Aladdin movie. We also had Beast get Evermore in Beauty and the Beast, and I gotta say, this is the same situation where he gets a new song, Wild Uncharted Waters, and I gotta say, it was really cool to see how this movie was a little bit more in-depth. Now, unfortunately, this may be the only Disney live-action movie that race swaps the main character that I'm probably gonna enjoy, because with the Snow White live-action movie coming out in next year, technically in 2025, I really hope they just recast Rachel Zegler, and I guess race swap her back to being an actor or a character played by a young white girl who looks more like Snow White. Heck, I think even this year they're supposed to release a Daily Wire version of the character played by YouTuber Brett Cooper. Not sure if I've seen her videos before, but I'll maybe go check them out eventually. But with The Little Mermaid, this was probably the only live action movie to have a main character race swap that I'm okay with. So for number 5, I gotta go with The Little Mermaid. So from number 4, I will say this is the last Disney movie that ended up on this list. Now it's funny because out of all the movies that came out this year, only Guardians of the Galaxy, Little Mermaid, and now this movie were released by Disney. And this fourth movie is Elemental. Yep, Elemental is the last Disney movie that ended up on my list for the top 15 movies of the year. And again, so this makes 3 Disney movies that ended up on my list, where you look at other top movies of each year's list that I've done, and I think I've had more Disney movies on there before, but because this year was not too well for Disney, I will say out of all the Disney movies that came out this year, Elemental was my favorite. I gotta say, it was a really cool story that they were telling, where it was like total opposite elements with fire and water actually becoming a thing, and it kind of reminds me of Zootopia, where it was in a similar boat, where you have a fox and a bunny sort of getting feelings for one another, but clearly they're mortal enemies in a way, just like how water and fire do not mix very well. But in this movie, they sort of tell that story a little bit better on how a fire element and a water element character are starting to get feelings for one another. They make it work, and it's nice that I will say it was a much better story that they were trying to tell, with especially with also pushing certain messaging in there as well. And the message that they were pushing is sort of discrimination in a way. So I will say this is the main Disney movie that I really enjoyed from 2023. Hopefully with the current Disney movies that are coming out this year, the only movie I can probably say will end up in my top movies list for this year will probably be Deadpool 3 and Inside Out 2 most likely, but we'll see what happens. But for number 4, I gotta go with Elemental. So for my number 3 spot, now, funny enough, from the last one I just did with Elemental and everything else after this is all animated, but with number 3, I gotta say this movie was a hell of a fun time that I honestly did not think I was gonna enjoy this movie, especially because I barely played the video games that this movie's based off of. I mean, heck, it was the same situation when I saw the Sonic the Hedgehog films, and I ended up enjoying both of those. And with this movie, it's no different, and that is, of course, the Super Mario Brothers movie. Now, when I first heard about the announcement of this film, I was a little surprised, especially when it came to the cast that were voicing the characters. Like, you had Chris Pratt voicing Mario, you had Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong, Anya Taylor-Joy as Princess Peach, but the one cast that really shocked me with this movie, and even had the character sing a song that ended up getting nominated for an original song, and I'm not sure if it was the Oscars or the Golden Globes, is Jack Black himself. That's right, Jack Black is the voice of Bowser in this movie, and he sang a song dedicated to Princess Peach, and boy does Jack Black nail the song that he was given about Princess Peach. Again, it was nominated for an award that I think it even won. I think it's going to actually win Best Original Song from a Movie this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if it did. But this movie, it was a great and entertaining time. I cannot wait to see what happens in the future of the Super Mario Brothers franchise in movie form especially. But for number 3, like I said, I gotta go with the Super Mario Brothers movie. So for my number 2 movie, now this is a movie, again, one of those movies that I honestly wasn't originally planning on watching during 2023, but after seeing a bunch of good reviews on it, especially from my friend Matthew Davis Media, I thought, you know what, I'll give this movie a try, and that is Neona. Now this is a Netflix movie that came out, and I think this is the only movie that came out this year that I actually saw on streaming that I really enjoyed. At least I think it is. Yep. This is the only streaming movie that ended up on my list. Now, Neona tells the story of a young girl who can turn into any type of creature, but unfortunately they also pushed a little bit of messaging in this where they make it seem like because she's so different, and they consider her to be a monster, and the people of the city that they live in, I forgot what the name of the city was, but basically they don't like anything different like her. And then we also get introduced to a character called Balthazar or whatever his name is, um, and he unfortunately is blamed for the murdering the queen because he's not noble. He's not of noble blood, and they only knights who are part of a royal bloodline, and he was the only commoner. And basically, him and Neona team up to try to change the system, to push back against people who clearly don't like Neona because of how different she is. And I gotta say, it was a really interesting story. Now, with the main human character that they introduced, Balthazar, there is another character in this movie that he's close to, and when I say close, I mean he's pretty much the only other gay character that's being featured in a movie like this. But this movie actually didn't focus on that as much as telling the story of Neona and him. And I gotta say, that's why I really enjoyed this movie. Now, unfortunately, it's not my number one, but it would have been had I not seen this other movie that is most obviously my number one choice for the year. And we're about to get into my number one right now. So, as we reach the end of the list, my number one favorite film from 2023, this was, I guess, really no surprise, especially with how well the first movie did back in 2018. I honestly did not think I was going to really enjoy this movie because this is just part 2 out of 3 movies that are planned. And that is, of course, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Yep, this was my favorite movie that I managed to see this year. And now, if I had seen other movies, though, that my friend Matthew Davis and my cousin saw, like Oppenheimer or Godzilla -1, just to name a few, if I had seen those movies, I probably would have put them as my number one, but I didn't, and this is the only movie that I've seen so far this year that I ended up putting as my number one film of 2023, because it was pretty much left on a cliffhanger that I really want to know what happens next. And rumor has it they're even thinking about connecting this movie to the live-action Spider-Man universe, and I'm curious how they're going to do that. And if they decide to ever do a live-action Miles Morales, I want to know who they're going to get to play a live-action version of Miles Morales. A lot of people have actually been recommending, what's the name of the kid who was in the 2010 movie of The Karate Kid, who was actually the son of the unfortunate Will Smith, who, as we all know, last year pretty much did a really bad thing at the Oscars where he went up and slapped Chris Rock in the face. But his son, specifically Justice Smith, I think is his name, he played the Karate Kid in the 2010 film version of the Karate Kid, and I really feel a lot of people have been recommending him to play Miles Morales. And again, it's only been 10 years, so I wouldn't be surprised if they got him to play the character. They did the same thing with Tom Holland. He was already over the age of 15. He was like 18 or 19 when they cast him as Spider-Man to play a 15-year-old kid. So it's no surprise that they would probably do the same thing with someone like Justice Smith, where it's been only 13 years since he showed up in that film. So we'll see how well the third installment of Spider-Man ends up doing. But for number one, I gotta go with Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So there you have it, everybody. That is my list for the top 15 movies of 2023. Now, even though this is being posted in 2024 now, I feel like I needed to do it soon, and now that y'all have seen what my favorite movies are. Now, in regards to how my list for this year is gonna end up pandering for 2024, there are a couple of movies that I'm already planning on seeing, but I don't have a lot, unfortunately. So hopefully I get enough movies that I decided I wasn't planning on seeing, but then I thought, you know what, I may actually give them a try if I get more intel on them. So we'll see how well 2024 pans out, and I will see you all at the end of the year with my rankings for the worst and the best movies of 2024, if it turns out to be a good year. So anyways, that's all for now, and I will see all of you guys in the next video.